Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The WBC interim champion Dillian Whyte, who was also the mandatory challenger to Tyson Fury's WBC belt, has called into question some of Tyson Fury's recent opponents, saying on social media, "Our last 10 opponents don't compare. Glove up, coward." And you can see this is the last part of this post on social media on Instagram. Dillian Whyte has been lobbing a number of grenades towards Tyson Fury in recent days and weeks, and Fury has been responding in kind. But I thought it was quite interesting, this comparison about the last 10 fights, because easy for Dillian Whyte to say that, but is it true? And this is where it's going to sort of get a bit subjective here, because if you're a Dillian Whyte fan or a Tyson Fury fan, you're probably going to be saying, you know, for the respective fighter who you support, more than likely that their record is better than the other. I think they've both got good records, but towards the end of the fight, I'll give my opinion on who I think is ahead at the moment. But it's worth going through the names at the moment, because these guys have both fought a couple of puddings along the way in the past 10 fights, and that's indisputable through some of the names we're going to go through, but there's also some very good names on their resume. But we'll start with Dillian Whyte, who's bigging up his own record, his past 10 fights, as compared to Fury's past 10 opponents. If we start back in 2016, you have Dave Allen. So Dave Allen on someone's resume, that's an okay win. It's not exactly, setting the world on fire. Neither is the next one of Ian Lewison. Both Allen and Lewison have proven to be domestic level in the UK. They're okay wins, but they're nothing special. Derek Chisora is like a gatekeeper at about a top 20 level. He was there or thereabouts back in 2016, as he has been for pretty much most of his career. It's a decent win. 2017, he fought Malcolm Tan. That really is a knockover job. It was a pretty soft opponent. It was his first fight in the United States. It was the first fight for 2017. He'd had a tough time coming off that Derek Chisora fight and landing an opponent in 2017. So he took that fight. That was on the undercard of a Terence Crawford fight card. Untelevised. It was off TV. So that really is not a great fight for Dillian Whyte. So he can't sort of say that he's been fighting killer after killer in the past 10 fights, because Malcolm Tan, complete knockover job. And Lewison and Allen, meh. The next one, and I think this one has aged well with time, Robert Helenius. At the time, it was a dreadful fight. It wasn't a good spectacle. And this is where some of it's going to, for people, is it just about the record, or is it about the way that you fought and won? Because for some of these fights, you can kind of go, a win is a win is a win, but then also you can look at it, if you take it to the next step, how did you perform in that fight? That Derek Chisora one, for example, from December 2016, that was an all-out barn burner, punches galore. A lot of people thought Dillian Whyte lost that fight. I thought Chisora edged that one. It was a split decision to Whyte. But in terms of the action, it was fantastic. But the Helenius one, it was a pretty dreadful spectacle. And we can sort of have a similar example on Tyson Fury's side, but we'll get to that a bit later. Lucas Browne. 2018, this was a fight heading into it where it was seen as a relatively close and competitive matchup, somewhere approaching a 50-50. As it transpired, the aging Browne hadn't really been training. He'd been fooling everyone on social media. He got knocked out in 6 rounds brutally. He looked dreadful pretty much from the off in that fight. So that's a win where I think ahead of that fight, people were thinking, yeah, it's a decently, matched and competitive fight. But it became apparent in the fight and subsequently that Lucas Browne is shot to pieces. So how much credit does Dillian Whyte get for that win, if you see what I mean? The next one, Joseph Parker, possibly the best win on his resume. He fought Parker, who at that point only had 1 loss on his record. That was in 2018, just a few months after Parker had lost his WBO belt to Anthony Joshua in a unification. Parker and Whyte, good fight. There was some controversy. Both guys hit the deck in that one. but it was a win for Whyte. So you can kind of look at some of these fights depending on the action, because some people are going to go, it's also about the way that you fought and the way that you got the decision or the knockout or whatever. But if you strip it back, right back to sort of basics, is it more about getting the win and the opponent and the record at the time? You can look at these things in a number of ways. 2018, also the end of that year, he rematches Derek Chisora. That was another pay-per-view. The Joseph Parker fight was a pay-per-view. He knocks Chisora out in the 11th round. It was a fight that he was trailing heading into that 11th round, but he got the job done. Pretty spectacular knockout. 2019, he fights Oscar Rivas, a somewhat unknown heavyweight to the casual fan, but those who've been following the sport to any degree, the heavyweight division, knew that Rivas was a decent heavyweight. He'd had some opportunities that had fallen through his career because he had an eye injury. He couldn't get licensed to fight in the United States. Amir Mansour and also Gerald Washington fights had fallen over through the years for Rivas. He'd been campaigning up in Canada as a result. So Rivas fights Whyte. He does drop Whyte, but ultimately Whyte gets a relatively comfortable points decision. It was a unanimous decision, 115-112, 115-112, 116-111. Arguably, after Joseph Parker, probably his best win, or you could maybe say one of the Chisora wins. It's kind of a muchness with some of those. But the final fight, 2019, on the Anthony Joshua Ruiz rematch card, that was Marius Vuk. And this was a fight Dillian Whyte came in overweight, 270 pounds, 271 I should say, a career heaviest, didn't look great in that fight. Vuk had more success than he otherwise probably would have had Whyte been in shape. So the last 10 opponents, there's some good names there, but it's not like Dillian Whyte has fought, top 5 guys fight after fight. But he's got some good names on there, a lot of good top 15 type names. Even though he said Oscar Rivas was top 10 at the time he fought him, he wasn't. He was maybe top 15-ish, somewhere around them. But the crux of his record in the past 4 years, the 10 fights, is Oscar Rivas, Derek Chisora times 2, Joseph Parker, and that Robert Helenius fight has actually aged well. We can probably discard the Malcolm Tan fight completely. He gets some credit for the Lewison, Allen, Lucas Brown fights, but overall, it's a solid resume. I'm not going to have people saying that he's got a bad resume because Dillian Whyte has actually fought some good competition. Maybe he should have gone into some eliminators and had that title shot against Joshua, which he turned down, but that's not what this video is about. It's about comparing the names. So we'll get on to Fury. So 2014, if we're going back to the 10th fight, Joey Abel. That is a solid sort of journeyman type name, especially at that time. Nothing special, kind of like the Dave Allen win. It is kind of what it is. Derek Chisora, that was the rematch. He beats Chisora up. Chisora retires in the 10th round. See, this will be a win because it's obviously a common opponent between him and Whyte, where people will say you have to look at the manner in which Tyson Fury beat Chisora as compared to the war that he had with Dillian Whyte had with Chisora the first time around, and that Dillian Whyte was looking a little bit sort of shaky for moments in that second fight before stopping Chisora. And this is where it's all subjective. I mean, like I said, are we looking at how they fought, or is it just the names, and is it just the tick in the win column? That's the issue that people were going to be debating and raging about. Christian Hammer, that was a decent win for Tyson Fury as well. Christian Hammer, a top 30 guy. He retired also in the 8th round. But the next one, which is the real sort of signature and certainly a better win than anything on Dillian Whyte's record, is Vladimir Klitschko. Tyson Fury famously dethrones Vladimir Klitschko, unanimous decision. But, a lot of people have said it's one of the most boring heavyweight title fights in history. And maybe some of the after effect in terms of the way people viewed Fury, obviously some of with his controversial personality, maybe he didn't get the credit that he deserved at the time. Obviously after that, he never fulfilled the rematch. He dropped out of the sport for about 2.5 years. But that Klitschko win is a signature win. And I guess the question is, when you look at the 10 fights, does Dillian Whyte have a signature win? Or does he just have a lot of good wins, like Rivas, like Parker, the Chisora wins, if you see what I mean? Is there one that so stands out you go, yep, that's a legacy-defining fight? I'm not so sure, but the Klitschko one, I think it's indisputable in terms of Fury's resume. It sticks out like a sore thumb as this was a really good win. And I know some people, as it pertains to the Deontay Wilder rematch, will talk about the way Fury destroyed Wilder. But the people who want to argue the toss about how you win is important. You know, people will use that against Fury when they talk about that Klitschko fight. So this is why I'm sort of trying to strip it back to the names, who they were at the time, and it's just more about the win, not so much about the way that it was fought, because I think that's just a more cold and calculated way to look at it. But this is where it comes down to, it's all subjective. But after that 2.5 years out, he has a really soft fight against Safiri, comeback fight. It was to be expected to some extent, and if we compare across records with Dillian Whyte, it's probably the equivalent of a Malcolm Tan type fight. A bit of a nothing fight, a throwaway one, and it's pretty much a complete putting on the record. Francesco Pianetta, the second comeback fight, and I guess with Fury's comeback, people will say, well, you have to account for the fact Fury was having comeback opponents as opposed to Dillian Whyte, who was fighting right through and didn't have 2.5 years off. So people will debate these points. Pianetta was a former title challenger, but at the point that he fought Fury, he was looking pretty shot, and it was a 100-90 performance to Tyson Fury. Pianetta didn't really fire a shot, and at that point, even though he was 33 or 34, Pianetta, was looking pretty dreadful in there. But this is where we come into a different period. Tyson Fury, that Deontay Wilder fight at the end of 2018, less than 6 months after he comes back, he gets a draw. A lot of people thought that he won, but for the purpose of his record, it was recorded as a draw. Deontay Wilder, a long-reigning champion at that point, he'd had, 7 or 8 defenses of his WBC title. Deontay Wilder and Fury fight to a draw. A fight Fury was knocked down in twice. That certainly was, for the third fight, for the comeback, people wondering how would Fury look, and he looked very good, obviously getting that draw and setting up down the line what would be a rematch in 2020. And that Deontay Wilder draw, even though it wasn't a win, still looks good on his resume. The next one, this is after he signed with ESPN, it was a complete, soft lob-up type fight, introduction to a new contract, Tom Schwarz, who, to this point, has proven he's only German domestic level. Had a padded record, 24-0. He hadn't fought basically anyone of note, hasn't fought anyone of note since, and he got sort of rumbled in a couple of rounds. He looked dreadful. Okay, so we're down to the second to last fight that we'll be covering of the 10 for Tyson Fury. Otto Wallin gets the win, unanimous decision, but it is an ugly fight. Otto Wallin has some success, open up some cuts, changes the way that Fury fought. It's hard to know how good this win will be right now because Otto Wallin hasn't fought since. It's kind of like that win for Dillian Whyte with Robert Helenius. It's aged well with time. We don't know how the Otto Wallin fight will age because Wallin hasn't fought, but he is a very good sort of talent, good southpaw. He has the potential to be a sort of top 20 sort of guy, be in some good fights and maybe get some good wins. But for now, it hasn't aged at all. Tom Schwarz, that was a pudding. Sefer Safiri, Pianetta, Joey Abel, it's not great. But then you have Deontay Wilder, the rematch win, signature win. This is the second one I believe he's got on his career. Vladimir Klitschko, Deontay Wilder, dominated Wilder, dethrones another long-reigning champion, the second of his career. So at this point, it sort of comes down to what you like more, because maybe with Dillian Whyte, you can sort of say some of the names overall, he's got maybe a lot of B-level wins, but Deontay Wilder and Vladimir Klitschko, clearly signature wins on Furies. So under that, there might be a little less in terms of the solid wins. He's got a good win against Hammer and Chisora, but apart from that, a bit thin. We don't know how to sort of classify, I believe at the moment, the Wallin fight. And this is where the debate rages on their records. Because I would sort of favour Tyson Fury in terms of he's got those bigger names. I think he's done a bit more in those past 10 fights in terms of meaningful fights than Whyte, who's had a lot of really solid fights, but he hasn't necessarily got that big signature win yet. And this is where some of the discussion about whose last 10 fights overall, if you were to weight them, is better. What do you make of it? I think it's not as easy as just sort of saying my last 10 opponents are better than yours because, so many different factors can go into it. drop a comment, loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.